Hi everyone. Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a review of Montreal Paralytic Stalks. Of Montreal is a Jauja band. This is their 11th full-length LP. And they're one of those sage indie acts that have been really interesting to follow over the years. Through all the highs and through all the lows. They started in the 90s sort of as a part of the Elephant Six collective, which churned out some really great acts like Elf Power, Apples in Stereo, Olivia Tremor Control, The Neutral Milk Hotels. And their early stuff, not to go on too long about it, was pretty much an assembly of acoustic and psychedelic pop tunes that were just proud to wear its Beatles influences. But Of Montreal later progressed into a sound that incorporated more electronics, more beats, more synthesizers, and also started bringing in sounds from glam rock and funk music too. Thankfully, over the course of this change, Of Montreal did not just become, a bland indie electronic act. And part of the reason they stayed interesting is because of the singing and the songwriting from frontman Kevin Barnes. Along with the music, his personality kind of changed too. In his songs, he used to be pretty kind of shy and introverted and threw out a lot of quirky lyrics, but on Of Montreal's more recent stuff, he feels much more frantic and overly emotional. It's a persona that he continues on this LP, especially on tracks like Dour Percentage, where his vocals are just so wild, just lashing out at anybody who will listen. The lyrics themselves are pretty raw and personal, sort of self-hating. Sometimes Kevin Barnes is definitely his own worst critic, which has always kind of made Of Montreal's dynamic kind of interesting, because you have these kind of tortured, painful lyrics being spewed out over this music that is just too sugary for words. Now on Paralytic Stalks, the music playing underneath Barnes' vocals is changing again, and it's going in a direction that I actually like more, honestly. It seems to be passing more on the electronics, on the beats, on the synths. It doesn't completely get rid of them. This album is not completely devoid of that stuff, especially on the intro to Ye Renew the Plaintiff or the end of We Will Commit Wolf Murder. But the role the electronics play on this album is noticeably smaller, and these sounds are being replaced with arranged instrumentation, with strings, with horns, with woodwinds, and piano. And to me it gives Of Montreal's usual eccentric and kind of schizophrenic personality a sort of refinement. It doesn't feel as gaudy, it doesn't feel too over the top. The band's still able to keep up its energy though, most of the time, because if there has been one other noticeable change that came with the electronics, with the beats, Of Montreal's music became really groove heavy. And that momentum is still here. It's just that with the arrangements, with the guitar, the drums, the bass, all this live instrumentation, this instrumentation that just feels alive, the energy is just different, more natural, I think. Like toward the end of the first half of Ye Renew the Plaintiff, where Of Montreal kind of goes in this psychedelic rock jam that gets pretty sweaty. Another thing Of Montreal keeps up with this LP, despite the sound change, is the musical density and detail that usually goes into its albums. There are so many sounds bouncing back and forth on these tracks. If you put a pair of headphones on, it will play Pong with your brain. A lot of tracks here just go through these really quick, fun, and almost unpredictable evolutions, a lot like the song Winter Debts. With all the changes on this track, it just feels like a song straight off of the White Album or Abbey Road or something. It starts off with this kind of acoustic introduction that is really kind of somber, and then it goes into these rushes of pianos. Eventually there's this pit orchestra swelling really ominously. There's a spot in here that sounds kind of country too, with this pedal steel playing and a sort of honky-tonk piano. In a way it kind of reminds me of old Of Montreal albums, where there's a lot of sound play. I would call it a rehash of old ideas, but this album just feels too big, instrumentally, to just say Of Montreal has taken a step backwards. There are other tracks on here that go through equally jarring changes that end up stringing these songs out to 7 minutes, 8 minutes. The final track is 13 minutes. So a lot of these tracks rely on either progressive or just really unconventional song structures, which makes listening to these tracks kind of like just driving really fast down a winding road. Between the instrumentation, the longer tracks, there's definitely some shade of evolution going on with this LP, but Of Montreal's changes have always come slowly. A lot like the album Satanic Panic in the Attic is kind of a foreshadowing of what was to happen on Hissing Fauna, Are You the Destroyer? And maybe Paralytic Stalks will be the launch pad for the next new interesting sound that Of Montreal plays with for a handful of albums. The band is experimenting with avant-garde music, like on the 8th track here, which is a number 9 style sound collage that goes on for 8 minutes and features a plethora of sounds, including the instrumentation that I just mentioned, and some spoken word. I think a lot of the new fans, especially the people who loved this group's poppier albums, might think that track is kind of boring, but I dug it. I thought it was intense. But still, even though Of Montreal is clearly experimenting on a lot of these tracks, their sweet side is still intact. Again, that track Dour Percentage, which has a groove that reminds me a lot of just disco music. The vocals and lyrics add that bittersweet touch to the song, and the saxophone solo off the back end of that track is just sassy. And the song Malefic Dowry is this acoustic tune that I can't quite make heads or tails of yet. It feels like as soon as that song rolls into town, I'm just on an island and I have a little coconut drink or something. It just feels really light and sunny and kind of cute. Now there are some issues I have with this LP, and I'm hoping that if Of Montreal continues with this sound, they hammer them out in future albums. Of Montreal is making a lot of their songs longer now, and in order to do that, they're adding more parts to their songs, and on some of these tracks, these parts flow together really well. On others, they don't, or the other parts just kind of feel like they're there. The song Winter Debts feels like a complete journey, and I really like how Ye Renew the Plaintiff starts off with these electronic beats, and through one transition after another just blows into this full-on rock song that really just, it's just awe-inspiring to me how that track changes. The final track, a lot like Winter Debts, has a pop tune at its start, a string break, and then a piano ballad toward the end, but I do think it relies on this string interlude in the middle a little too much. And while I'm complaining, I wasn't that huge on the first track. It was kind of heavy, psychedelic, and hazy, but just not all that memorable for me. And overall, I guess I wish this album was as conceptual as other Of Montreal albums that I love, and if there is a concept going on with this thing, it has not really revealed itself to me yet. But as far as the lyrics and the stories on this LP go, it's a lot of the same stuff Kevin Barnes has been singing about on his past several albums. And he knows that. He even brings it up in the second track of the LP, where he says, "Lately all I can produce is psychotic vitriol that really should fill me with guilt." And, you know, it's kind of interesting to see that extra layer of self-awareness get just placed on top of this album. But I think the lyrics are kind of due for a change, just like the music is, and that change is happening here. With this record, I think you get a lot of solid pop tunes, some nice experimentation, some progressive song structures, classier instrumentation, some great arrangements written for that classy instrumentation, and the assurance that Of Montreal is not going anywhere. This is definitely the most fun I've had listening to a new Of Montreal album in a while, but what do I know? I didn't even really dig Hissing Fauna as much as most people did. I'm feeling a decent to strong 7 on this LP. What did you guys think of it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? And what should I review next? Anthony Fantano, Of Montreal, forever.